The whole store was laughing at the old woman who couldn't pay. And the young clerk in the cheap blazer got down beside her chair and pressed her own crumpled bills into the woman's hand anyway. "For the bus home, ma'am," she said quietly. "Take it." The laughter sharpened. $40,000 of diamonds lay open in their velvet boxes on the glass counter. 10 sets the old woman had asked for, that the clerk had spent an hour choosing. And the old woman had just turned out her empty pockets, and the manager's heels were already clicking across the marble toward them. And everyone in the room had decided exactly what this was. A poor old fool. A stupid girl who'd wasted an hour on her, a scene. The clerk didn't look up at the laughing faces. She folded the woman's wrinkled fingers around the money and held them a moment, the way you'd steady someone on ice. What not one of them knew. Not the manager about to fire her. Not the staff filming it on their phones. Not the girl on her knees on the marble. Was that the name stamped in gold on every one of those velvet boxes, the name over the door, the name on the whole gleaming empire, was the old woman's own. Comment below where you're watching from, and stay until the end. Nia Coleman had worked at Hampton & Co. for 14 months, and in 14 months, she had sold more diamonds than anyone on the floor, and been paid for almost none of them. The store was the flagship. 3 stories of glass and white marble on the most expensive block in the city. The kind of place where a security guard opened the door for you, and a second one watched to make sure you belonged. The Hampton name was carved over the entrance in letters taller than a man, lit gold at night. Inside, everything was hushed and cold and beautiful, and Nia, in her one good blazer that she pressed every morning and that was going shiny at the elbows, had learned to move through it, like she was apologizing for the space she took up. It hadn't started that way. She'd come in bright 14 months ago, good at the work in a way that surprised people. She could read a customer in 10 seconds, knew when to talk and when to go quiet it, could make a nervous man buying his first engagement ring feel like the most decisive person in the world. The commissions should have been hers. They mostly weren't. That was Daphne Hill's doing. Daphne managed the floor, and Daphne had a system. When a sale was small or difficult or beneath her, it was Nia's. When it closed big, Daphne's name went on the ticket, or the client got handed at the last moment to one of the senior associates, Renee or Patrice, the two who'd been there longest, and who'd decided early that Nia was beneath them. Nia would do the 90 minutes of work and watch someone else sign the slip. When she'd raised it, once, carefully, Daphne had looked at her over a pair of glasses she didn't need and said, "You should be grateful you're on this floor at all. Girls like you usually don't get past the loading dock." So Nia stopped raising it. She needed the job. There was no version of her month that worked without this paycheck, thin as it was, and Daphne knew it, and used it, the way the people who are frightened of their own position will always find someone below them to stand on. Because that was the thing Nia had figured out about Daphne that the others hadn't. Daphne wasn't cruel because she was powerful. She was cruel because she wasn't. She had clawed her way up from a counter exactly like the one Nia stood at, had remade her voice and her clothes and her whole self to belong in this cold white room, and she lived every day in terror that someone would see through it and send her back down. Nia, with her shiny elbows and her quiet competence, was a mirror Daphne couldn't stand to look in. Knowing that didn't make the days easier. But it kept Nia from hating her cleanly, and Nia had learned that clean hatred was a luxury she couldn't afford anyway. So she ran the errands they gave her instead of selling. Picked up Daphne's dry cleaning, fetched the coffees, wiped down the vault room when the cleaner called out. She let Renee and Patrice peel her clients away mid-sentence. She kept her face still and her work good, and she told herself, most mornings, that stillness was a kind of strength and not just a kind of surrender, and most mornings she almost believed it. She was wrong about one thing though, and it was the thing that would change everything. She thought her kindness was just who she was, a reflexes, costless, nothing. She didn't understand yet that in a room built to measure people by what they could pay, The woman who treats a person with no money like a person at all is the rarest thing on the floor, and that someone, someday would be counting. It was a slow gray afternoon when the glass door swung open, and the old woman came in. She did not belong, and the room knew it instantly. Her coat was thin and peeled, the hem coming down on one side. Her shoes were the soft flat kind sold 3 pairs to a bag, worn to the shape of tired feet. Her hair was tucked under a faded headscarf, and she moved slowly, one hand out a little for balance, taking in the glittering cases with the open wonder of someone who had wandered somewhere she'd only seen through windows. Renee's nose wrinkled like she'd smelled something. Patrice actually stepped back. "Ma'am." Patrice's voice was loud and slow, the voice you'd use on a child or a dog. "Ma'am, I don't think you're in the right place. This is a luxury retailer." The old woman smiled. She had a wide, unembarrassed smile, a few teeth gone yellow with age. "I just want to look," she said. Such pretty things. Daphne's heels were already crossing the floor. She came to a stop a careful distance away, as if proximity might cost her something, and looked the old woman up and down, slow, letting the whole floor watch her do it. "We don't serve people like you," Daphne said. "Not loud, worse than loud, pleasant. This is a shop for serious clients. Not for browsing. There's a public library 2 blocks down if you'd like somewhere warm to sit." Renee laughed. Patrice laughed. Somewhere near the watch counter, a phone came up, angled to catch it. And Nia, who had been refilling the ring trays at the far end of the floor, and who knew in her stomach, in her teeth, exactly what it felt like to be looked up and down, and found too poor to stand somewhere, set down her tray and walked over. She didn't make a speech. She'd learned a long time ago that speeches were for people who had room to lose. She just touched the old woman's arm gently and said, "Would you like to sit down? Can I get you some water? It's a long walk to anywhere from here." The old woman turned to her, and something moved across her face. Not gratitude exactly, something sharper and more interested, like a person who has been looking for something and has just caught the edge of it. "Water would be lovely," she said. Nia brought a paper cup from the break room, cold, the way she'd want it if her feet hurt and the world had just told her she was filth. She pulled one of the velvet stools over to a quiet corner of the counter and helped the old woman sit, ignoring the stares she could feel on the back of her neck like heat. "Take your time," she said. "There's no rush. Sit as long as you like and tell me if you need anything." The old woman drank, slow, watching Nia over the rim of the cup. When she set it down, her wrinkled hand came over and rested on Nia's a moment, light and dry and warm. "Good things come back to good people," she said. "You remember that. Not always how you expect, but they do." Nia didn't know why the words landed the way they did, a strange tightness behind her eyes, here on the worst floor of the worst job, over a paper cup of tap water. She didn't have time to wonder, because the old woman's face brightened, and she patted the counter and she said, "Now, you're going to help me, dear. I want to buy some things, the best you have, 10 sets, necklaces, the gold bangles, custom rings. The finest. Help me pick." Nia blinked. 10. The old woman's eyes were merry. "I want the best you've got." And here was the thing about Nia that the rest of the floor would never understand. She did not, for 1 second, decide the old woman was lying. She had spent her whole life being assumed to be less than she was, and she had made herself a promise long ago that she would not do it to other people, not ever, not even when it cost her. So she didn't smirk. She didn't glance at Daphne for permission. She just nodded and reached for the keys to the good cases and said, "Then let's find you something beautiful." For nearly an hour she worked. She brought out the pieces the senior staff guarded like dragons. The estate necklaces, the blue-white solitaires, the gold bangles heavy as handcuffs. She laid black velvet across the counter and arranged the sets on it one by one. She found earrings to match the necklaces, talked the old woman through the cut and the color and the weight, watched her face to see, which made her hands come up to her mouth in delight. It was, Nia realized somewhere in the middle of it, the most fun she'd had on this floor in 14 months. to actually do the work she was good at, to treat a customer like the most important person in the building, even this customer, especially this customer. Across the floor, the others watched and whispered. "She's actually doing it," Renee said behind her hand. "She's pulling the estate pieces for that." "She's broke," Patrice murmured. "Anyone can see it. Look at the shoes." Daphne folded her arms and leaned against the pillar and let a small smile sit on her mouth. "Let her," she said softly. "Let her finish. I want to watch the bill." Nia heard none of it, or chose to. She finished. She stepped back and looked at the spread of light on the counter. Close to $40,000 in diamonds and gold. And she smiled, real. The first real smile she'd worn at work in a long time. "There," she said. "I think these are perfect for you, ma'am." The old woman clapped her wrinkled hands together once, like a girl. "Oh, they're wonderful. I'll take them all." Nia's heart did something complicated and bright. Even if it fell apart, even if there was some confusion about the money, she had done the work. She had treated this woman like a queen, and that was its own thing. She didn't let herself reach for the larger hope, the one about commissions and Daphne finally seeing. But it was there at the edges anyway. "Wonderful," she said. "Let me total it for you. It comes to $38,420. The room went very quiet. The old woman patted at the pockets of her thin coat, patted them again. Her face fell into a soft theatrical dismay. "Oh," she said. "Oh dear, I don't seem to have brought any money with me." The laughter broke over the floor like a wave. It came from everywhere at once. Renee's high bark, Patrice's delighted shriek, a guffaw from the men at the watch counter, the small mean titter of the customers who'd stopped to watch. Nia's smile froze on her face. A phone was up, 2 phones recording. "Are you kidding me?" Renee was almost shrieking. An hour. She spent an hour on a, oh my God. Daphne's heels came across the marble slow and certain. And her perfume arrived before she did, and she stopped beside Nia and looked at her with something closest to pity, which was the cruelest thing she had. "You really are simple, aren't you?" Daphne said, pleasant as ever. "Pitch to carry. You actually thought this woman could pay for diamonds." She turned to the room, performing now. An hour. She gave a homeless woman the full estate treatment for an hour. Nia looked at the old woman. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "you don't have any money." The old woman sighed, and for just a flicker something passed behind her eyes that was not embarrassment at all. Something watchful, almost apologetic, gone before Nia could name it. "I do," she said, "but it's with my grandson. He's very rich, you see. I just need to find him." The floor howled. "Her grandson," Patrice gasped. "She's looking for her rich grandson." "Of course she is," Renee wheezed. And Nia stood in the middle of all that laughter with her face burning. And she made the choice she would make again and again across the next strange weeks. The choice that was the whole of who she was. She did not join them. She did not even let her face apologize for the old woman. She got down beside the stool, eye to eye with her, and she pressed her own crumpled bill, her bus money, her lunch money, the soft, thin folding money of a person who counted it, into the woman's hand. "It's all right, ma'am," she said softly. "Don't worry about any of it. Here for the bus home at least. Take it." The old woman's hand closed around the money, and her hand was trembling, and she stared at Nia like she was the first warm thing in a long cold year. "You," she whispered, "are a rare one." Daphne's voice cut down through the laughter, sharp now, the pleasantness gone. "I warned you, Nia." She was close, her voice low and hard. "I told you not to drag the street in off the sidewalk. Hampton and Co. has a standard. You've stood here and made a spectacle of this floor in front of clients." She straightened and said the next part loud, for everyone, because firing Nia in front of the floor was worth more to her than firing her quietly. "You're done. Get your bag. You're fired. Get out of my store." Nia stood up slowly. She looked for one moment at the diamond spread shining on the velvet, and at the laughing faces, and at the old woman clutching a few crumpled dollars in her trembling hand. There was so much she could have said. She'd done nothing wrong. She'd been the only person in the room who'd behaved like a human being. She could have made them say it. She didn't. She had learned in 14 months and in a whole life before that begging the people who'd already decided about you to undecide was the surest way to hand them the last of your dignity for free. So she took a breath, and she blinked hard once, and she picked up her bag from behind the counter, and she walked out of Hampton & Co. with her chin level and her back straight and not one word. The bell over the door chimed behind her. The afternoon light hit her on the sidewalk, bright and indifferent. She had no job now, and no bus money, and a long walk home, and she did not look back. Which was why she didn't see the old woman, still on the velvet stool, watching her go with an expression that was not sad at all. The old woman turned at last to Daphne. "You shouldn't measure people by their coats, dear," she said. Her voice had changed. It was quiet, but the wobble had gone out of it, and underneath was something level and old and used to being obeyed. "Kindness is worth more than anything in these cases. You'll want to remember that, sooner than you think." Daphne rolled her eyes. "Spare me, please. Do you have any idea where you are? This is $1 billion house. People like you don't belong anywhere near it." The old woman rose from the stool. She did it slowly, but she did it without help, and there was something in the straightening of her spine that made Renee stop laughing. "Wealth," the old woman said, "isn't the money, child. It never was. But you'll learn that the hard way, I think. People like you usually do." Security. Daphne's face had gone tight. "Walk this woman out now." 2 guards came. The old woman lifted a hand before they could touch her, almost gentle. "No need for that," she said. "I'm going." And she walked to the door under her own power, and at the threshold she paused and looked back once across the gleaming floor, across all of them, and she smiled. A small, private, almost pitying smile. And then she stepped out into the afternoon sun and was gone. Daphne smirked at the staff. The staff smirked back. They had no idea they had just made the worst mistake of their working lives. The taxi the old woman hailed took her up and up, out of the bright cold canyons of downtown and into the hills, where the houses pulled back from the road behind walls, and the trees grew old and tended. When it turned in at a set of iron gates, and the gates swung open on their own, and the drive went on and on past lawns and fountains toward a house the size of a small museum, the driver's eyes found her in the mirror. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "is this? You sure this is the right address?" The old woman only smiled and pressed the folded bill into his hands far larger than the fare, and let a uniformed man open her door. Inside, the house was all pale stone and high windows, and the deep hush of serious money. And in the center of the great front room, turning fast at the sound of the door, stood a man in a suit that fit him the way few things in this world fit anyone. Tall, sharp-eyed, every inch the thing the magazine said he was. Marcus Hampton, chief executive of the Hampton Group, the youngest man ever to run the empire his grandmother had built out of nothing 60 years before. "Where have you been?" he said, crossing to her, and the worry in it stripped all the boardroom out of his voice. 6 hours. You can't just. Grandmother, you can't disappear like that." Eleanor Hampton let him take her thin coat off her shoulders, and she patted his cheek with one dry hand. "I was out testing the world, Marcus," she said, "the way I do, and today I found something worth keeping." He frowned. "Tell you went out. Like this again. In the rags. I went to one of our stores." She let him guide her to a chair, lowered herself into it with a small sigh. "The flagship, the one with my name 3 feet tall over the door." She looked up at him, and the merriness was gone now, and what was under it was harder. "And do you know what happened to me? In a store that bears our family name, Marcus? They laughed at me. They called me filth. A manager named Daphne offered to direct me to the public library, so I'd have somewhere warm to sit. And when I pretended I couldn't pay, the whole floor, your people, laughed until they cried." Marcus had gone very still. "They did what?" "There was one." Eleanor's voice softened, and her hand closed unconsciously around the crumpled bills still in her coat pocket. "One girl. They had her running their errands. I could see it, the way they spoke to her, And when they were all laughing at the poor old fool, she got down on the floor beside me, on her knees, Marcus, on the marble, and she gave me her own money, her bus money, so I'd get home. Eleanor looked at her grandson, and then your manager fired her for it. For being kind to me, fired her in front of everyone. And the girl walked out without one word, with her head up, and she has no job tonight because she treated me like a human being. The room was very quiet. Marcus Hampton's jaw had set in a way the people who worked for him would have recognized and feared. That store is ours, he said. Those people draw their checks from me. Yes, they threw out my grandmother. And they fired the one person who... He stopped, turned. Desmond. His assistant was already in the doorway, a lean, careful man who'd learned to appear before he was called. Sir, pull the security footage from the flagship. Today, all of it. Marcus's voice was low and even, which was worse than shouting. And find me the girl. The one who was fired. I want her name, where she lives, everything tonight. Marcus. Eleanor's voice caught him at the door. He turned. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Something between satisfaction and warning. The look of a woman who has set a thing in motion and intends to see exactly where it goes. The girl is to be rewarded, she said. Properly, but gently. She's not the kind you can hand a check to and call it square. I watched her refuse easier money than that today, without even noticing she was refusing it. A pause. Be careful with her. She's the realest thing I've seen in years, and the real ones break if you handle them like the others. Marcus didn't fully understand the warning. He would. But he nodded and went to find the footage, and an hour later he sat alone in his study and watched it on the wall screen. Watched the laughter, watched Daphne's slow, cruel walk, and watched a young woman in a shiny elbowed blazer get down on her knees on the marble and press her own folded bills into an old woman's trembling hand, and then stand up and walk out with her chin level and not say a single word in her own defense. He watched it 3 times. Find her, he said again to the empty room. He wasn't sure yet why it mattered so much. Only that it did. Naya walked the long way home because she had no fare, and her feet ached, and somewhere on the 2nd mile, the careful stillness she'd held in the store finally cracked, and she had to stop and lean against a wall and breathe until the burning behind her eyes went down. She had given away her last cash to a stranger. She had no job. There was a number in her head, the rent, the days until it was due, and the number did not work, had not worked even with the job, and now there was no job. She was 26 years old and entirely alone in the world. And she had been alone in it for a long time. And the worst part of days like this was not the fear. It was how familiar the fear was. She did not cry in the end. She straightened up off the wall and kept walking, because that was the other thing she knew how to do. She was 3 blocks from her building when a car pulled to the curb beside her. Long, black, polished to a wet shine. A car from a different world idling on her gray street. The window came down. A man in a beautiful suit leaned toward the gap. Miss Coleman? Nia's whole body went tight. She knew exactly one thing about being a woman alone on a street when an expensive car slows down, and it wasn't good. She took a step back. My name is Desmond, the man said quickly, holding up both hands, palms out, an old gesture. I work for Mr. Marcus Hampton, the Hampton Group. He let that sit. The woman you helped today in the store. She asked us to find you. Mr. Hampton would like to meet you, to thank you. Nia stared at him. It was insane. The CEO of the company that had just fired her, wanting to thank her, sending a car like a spaceship to her sidewalk. Every sensible thing in her said, scam, said, walk away, said, nothing this shaped has ever once been good for you. I think you have the wrong person, she said. I don't. Desmond's voice was gentle. The old woman, the one on the stool with the water. That was Mr. Hampton's grandmother. He watched the words land. Eleanor Hampton. She built the company. She sent me herself. You're safe. I'll take you there, and I'll take you home, whenever you want to come home. But she'd very much like to see you again. The pavement seemed to tilt very slightly under Nia's feet. His grandmother, the old woman in the peeled coat and the soft worn shoes. the name on the door 3 feet tall. She thought of the wrinkled hand on hers, the merry eyes. Good things come back to good people, not always how you expect. She should have said no. Everything she'd learned said no. But there was a different, smaller voice, the one that had made her kneel on the marble in the first place, and it said, go. So she swallowed, and her heart slammed, and she said, okay. The car was the softest thing she'd ever sat in. She held her bag in her lap with both hands the whole way up into the hills, and did not let herself lean back. The mansion undid her a little. She'd known it would be big. She hadn't known it would be the kind of big that made your own life feel like a rumor. The gates, the drive, the staff who came out to open her door as if she was someone. She got out into all of it, feeling like a stain on a clean floor, and she made herself stand straight anyway, the way she always did. And then she saw him at the top of the stone stairs, and even Nia, who was good at not being impressed, lost her breath for a second. She'd seen his face, of course. Everyone had. Marcus Hampton on the covers, in the business pages, the youngest billionaire, the one the city had decided things about. In person he was worse, or better, taller, the edges sharper, a stillness to him that made the air around him feel organized. She remembered, absurdly, standing at the counter at work months ago while Renee said, if I ever got within 10 feet of Marcus Hampton, I'd have him married by Christmas. Tia and the whole floor laughing. And now here he was, looking down at her, and his mouth curved into something that was almost a smile, but was mostly just attention, total and uncomfortable. Miss Coleman, he said. Nia, she said, just Nia. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was a small mercy. There she is. Eleanor came in from a side room, transformed. The rags gone, in soft fine clothes now, but the same merry face, the same wide gap-toothed smile. My rare one. Come in, child. Come in, Marcus. Don't just loom at her. You'll frighten her. You frighten everyone. She took Nia's hands in both of hers. You came. You. Nia looked from her to the marble hall, to the man on the stairs and back. You live here, you. All of this is. I'm not quite as poor as I looked, am I? Eleanor patted her hand, delighted with herself. Forgive an old woman her games. I go out into the world the way it really is, now and then. It's the only way to see who people are when they think you're no one. Her eyes searched Nia's face, fond. And today I saw exactly who you are. Nia's knees felt strange. This family, this enormous impossible family. And she had knelt on the floor and given away her bus money to its matriarch without the faintest idea. She felt very small and very tired and very aware of the shine on her elbows. Eleanor turned to Marcus, and her voice when it came was light, but her eyes were not light at all. This, she said, is the kind of woman you should be looking at, Marcus, not the ones who come gift-wrapped. Nia's face went hot. She laughed, waving her hands. Oh, no, please, I'm not. But she made the mistake of looking at Marcus. And Marcus wasn't laughing it off. He wasn't smirking. He was just looking at her, steady and serious, a long, quiet look that went on a bit too long. And for some reason it made Nia's heart go hard against her ribs, and she had to look away first. They put her in a sitting room that was bigger than the apartment she could no longer afford, and a woman brought tea on a tray, and Nia perched on the edge of a velvet sofa and held the cup so she'd have something to do with her hands. Marcus sat across from her. He had a way of being still that made you feel he was reading the small print of you. I ran a background check on you, he said. The cup stopped halfway to her mouth. You what? As I wanted to understand the person who gave my grandmother her last few dollars and then got fired for it. He said it plainly, without apology, which she would later learn was simply how he said most things. It wasn't much of a check. There isn't much to find, a pause. You're on your own, no family, no one. It wasn't cruel the way he said it. It wasn't even pity. It was just the fact, laid flat on the table between them, and somehow that was worse. Somehow hearing it said aloud in this beautiful room, by this beautiful, powerful stranger, made the loneliness she carried every day suddenly weigh what it actually weighed. She looked down into the tea. That's right, she said. Marcus watched her for a moment. Then he set down his own cup and lifted a hand, and Desmond opened the door, and 2 members of staff came in carrying boxes, big ones, glossy, tied with ribbon. Nia's stomach dropped. "What's this?" "A thank you." He said it like it was obvious. The first box opened unfolded silk designer clothes, fabric that probably cost a year of her old salary. The second held a jewelry set from the very cases she used to dust, diamonds she had been forbidden to so much as breathe on. And then Desmond stepped forward with a small box, and inside it, when Marcus flipped it open, was a key. A car key. "There's a car in the drive," Marcus said. "It's yours, for what you did." For a moment, Nia just looked at it all. The silk, the diamonds, the key, laid out for her like she was a problem being solved. And then something in her, something proud and bone-deep and old, stood up. "No," she said. It was not, she could tell, a word he heard often. "No, no thank you." She set the teacup down very carefully so it wouldn't rattle. "I didn't help your grandmother to get anything. I helped her because she was being treated like she was nothing, and she isn't nothing. And I happened to be standing there." Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "If I take a car for it, then it wasn't kindness. It was just a transaction I hadn't been paid for yet, and I'd rather have done a kind thing for free than a paid thing for a car." She made herself meet his eyes. "So no, but thank you." The room was silent. Eleanor, in her chair by the window, had gone very still and was watching her grandson's face with the focus of a woman watching a wager come in. Marcus Hampton looked at Nia Coleman for a long moment, like she was a word in a language he thought he was fluent in. "You're turning down a car," he said slowly. "Yes, people don't turn down the car." "I'm not people," Nia said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "I'm broke, Mr. Hampton. I lost my job today, and I gave away my last cash this afternoon, and I genuinely don't know how I'm paying rent. So believe me, I know exactly what I'm saying no to. I'm saying it anyway." And Marcus Hampton, who had been handed the world and had watched a great many people reach for what he could give them, did something that surprised him as much as her. He smiled. Not the boardroom curve, a real one, quick and unguarded, gone almost before it arrived. "You're different," he said quietly, like he was noting it for later. Eleanor clapped her hands once, sharp and satisfied. "Well," she said, "if you won't take the gifts, you'll at least do an old woman the courtesy of staying a few days. I like your company, Nia, and I have very little of it that I enjoy. Rest. You've had a wretched day. Decide the rest of your life on a full stomach." Nia hesitated. Everything about it was too much, too fast, too far above her station. But Eleanor's eyes were kind and stubborn at once, and Nia was so tired, and the number in her head said the apartment was lost anyway, and so, against every instinct she had, she nodded. She had no idea she'd just walked into the center of someone else's war. Bianca Vaughan arrived 2 days later in a red convertible that she drove too fast up the drive and stopped too hard at the steps, and she was out of it before the dust settled, all heels and sunglasses and a mouth set in a line. Nia was crossing the front hall when Bianca came through the door, and Bianca's gaze found her and stopped, and Nia watched the whole conclusion form behind the other woman's eyes in half a second. Who is this? What is she? Why is she here? And curdle into something cold. "Marcus," Bianca's voice rang off the marble, sweet and sharp at once. "Marcus, tear came as soon as I heard you were." She stopped, looking at Nia. "Who is this?" Marcus appeared from the study and hurried, adjusting a cuff. "Bianca who?" Bianca said again, not taking her eyes off Nia. "Is she?" "A bit. Is she staff?" "Why is the staff using the front hall?" "She's my grandmother's guest," Marcus said evenly. "Her name is Nia. You'll be civil to her." Bianca laughed, a bright, disbelieving sound. "A guest in this house?" She turned fully to Nia now, and looked her up and down the way Daphne had, the way the whole world seemed to, and Nia felt the old heat climb her neck and made herself stand still under it. "Let me guess, you met the old woman somewhere, did a good deed, and now you've moved in. How long are you planning to stay, sweetheart?" "Until the jewelry starts walking off." "Bianca." Marcus's voice didn't rise, but something in it dropped 10 degrees. "That's enough." And there it was, the thing that made Bianca's face go briefly, genuinely blank with shock. She had expected him to agree with her. She had expected, perhaps, that he would be a little embarrassed about the charity case in the hall, that he would side with her the way the men in her world always sided with the woman who belonged. Instead, he had stepped in front of the stranger. Bianca recovered fast. She'd had practice. "I'm only looking out for you," she said, flipping her hair. "You're too trusting, Marcus. You always have been. She's poor. She doesn't belong here, and you know it. And one day you'll thank me for saying so." And yet, Marcus said, here she is. It would be easy to make Bianca a simple thing, and the people in that house mostly did. But the truth of Bianca Vaughn was sadder and more human than that, and it was the engine of everything she did next. She was the daughter of Marcus's late father's closest friend, and from the time she was a girl she had been told, by her parents, by his father, by the soft assumptions of two families who liked the idea, that she and Marcus were a settled thing, a merger waiting to happen, inevitable. No one had ever actually asked Marcus. No one had ever actually asked her either. But she had built her entire adult life on the foundation everyone had laid for her. She had styled herself as his future, had let the world call her his companion, had passed up other lives in the certainty of this one. She didn't love him, not really. But she had spent 15 years becoming the woman who would be Mrs. Hampton. And a person who has spent 15 years building a single house does not stand calmly by while someone walks in and shows her there was never a foundation under it at all. That was the thing that made her dangerous, not the cruelty, the terror underneath it, the same terror as Daphne's, dressed in better clothes. The dawning, unbearable knowledge that the thing she'd organized her whole self around had never actually been hers. She left that afternoon in a spray of gravel, but she did not leave it alone. Within a week, she had found the one other person in the city who had a reason to hate Nia Coleman, and the two of them had begun, quietly, to plan. Nia, for her part, did not want to be kept. It went against everything in her to live on someone's kindness, however soft the bed. After 3 days of wandering the enormous house feeling like a smudge, she found Eleanor and Marcus at breakfast, and made herself say it. "I need to find work," she said. "I can't just stay here, be a guest. I've never not earned my keep in my life, and I'm not about to start. I'll find something. I just wanted to say thank you, and that I'll be out of your way soon." Eleanor's eyes flicked to her grandson, bright with something that looked suspiciously like a card being played. Marcus set down his coffee. "I need a personal assistant," he said. Nia blinked. "What? The position's been open for 2 months. I keep rejecting people. It needs someone organized, discreet, and impossible to rattle." He looked at her. "I watched you get fired in front of a floor full of people without losing your composure for a second. You fit the description. That's..." Nia's mind raced. A PA to Marcus Hampton. The salary alone would change her life, would mean rent, would mean breathing. But it would also mean working under the eyes of a man whose grandmother kept calling her the kind of woman he should marry, in a building full of people who would have opinions about exactly how a fired shop girl came to be the CEO's assistant. "I don't think that's a good idea," she said. "Why not?" "Because people will say things. People always say things." He said it like a man genuinely unbothered by it, which she would learn was both true and a kind of privilege he didn't fully see. "I'm offering you a job, Nia, not a favor. You'd be good at it, and I'd be paying you for work. That's not charity. That's the opposite of the car." He let that land because he'd understood her, in the sitting room, better than she'd realized. "Earn your keep. Here's a keep to earn." She looked at him a long moment. He'd built the offer to be one she could take, not a gift, a job. Not pity, a paycheck. It was, she'd think later, the first genuinely thoughtful thing anyone in that house had done for her, precisely because it cost her nothing of her pride. "Okay," she said, "I'll do it. But the first time it stops being a real job and starts being charity, I walk." "Understood." And Marcus almost smiled again. Eleanor, watching, said nothing at all, but her teacup hid a very satisfied mouth. The Hampton Group headquarters was 40 floors of glass downtown, and Nia walked into it on her first morning in a plain pressed dress, holding her bag with both hands, and she felt every eye in the lobby find her and prize her. The whispers started before the elevator. "That's her, the new assistant. I heard she was fired from the flagship and the CEO personally. Please, you don't get handed the PA job for ringing up watches. You know how she got it." A woman in a red blazer, loud enough to be meant. "I heard she slept her way up from the sales floor." A laugh. "Or she's the side piece and the job's a cover." Nia's face burned. She kept her chin level and her eyes forward, and she said nothing because she had learned, on a marble floor, that the people who'd already decided about you would only feed on a defense. Let them talk, she told herself. Let them. She was here to work. She would be so good at the work that the work would eventually be louder than the whispers. She believed that, mostly, the way she believed stillness was strength. Most of the time and never entirely. And the whispers had a source, though Nia didn't know it yet. Bianca Vaughn was a senior manager in the company, a sinecure her family connection had bought her years ago, and Bianca had spent the week before Nia's arrival doing what she was genuinely good at, which was moving a story through a building. By the time Nia badged in on the first morning, the air was already thick with it. The gold digger, the social climber, the girl who'd slept her way off the sales floor. Bianca didn't have to say any of it twice. She just had to say it once, to the right three people, with the right sorrowful concern, and let the building do the rest. Nia worked. She was, it turned out, extraordinary at the job. She learned Marcus's calendar and his moods, and the small tells that meant a meeting was about to go badly. She caught 2 errors in 2 days that had slipped past the people paid far more than her. She was unrattleable, exactly as advertised, a still point in the churn of the 40th floor. And working that closely with Marcus, she began, against her own better judgment, to see the rest of him. Not the magazine man. The other one. The one who stayed late because the alternative was an empty house. The one who'd never once, in his whole gilded life, been certain whether a person liked him or his money, and who had built a wall so high around that uncertainty that no one had ever gotten over it. She watched him be quietly fair to people who'd never know he'd been fair to them. She watched him with his grandmother, the only person on earth he fully trusted, and saw how much it cost him to have only one. And he watched her back. He found himself inventing reasons to call her in, waiting, without admitting it, for the particular dry way she had of saying a true thing. Catching himself looking too long, the way he had on the stairs. The gossip reached him by the end of the first week, because gossip always reached the top eventually. And when he learned where it had started, the temperature of the 40th floor changed. He called an all-staff meeting. He didn't tell anyone why. He walked into the boardroom with the whole division assembled and Bianca at the head of the table looking pleased, certain she'd finally made him see the problem, and his eyes went straight past her to the room. "I've heard," Marcus said without preamble, "a great deal of talk this week about Miss Coleman, about how she got her position. I want to address it once, clearly, so no one has to wonder." He let the silence stretch. "She got it because she is exceptional at it. And because when my grandmother was treated like garbage in our own flagship store, Nia Coleman was the only employee on the floor who behaved like a decent human being, and was fired for it." His voice was flat and carrying. "She is more of a person than most of you will manage to be in your whole careers. And if I hear one more word about her that isn't about her work, I will find out who said it, and they will not work here anymore. Are we clear?" The room had gone the color of paper. At the head of the table, Bianca's pleased expression had collapsed into something stunned and furious. She had walked in expecting a coronation. She had gotten this, humiliated by proxy, in front of the entire division, for a shop girl. And at the back of the room, Nia stood very still, and felt something she had no name for, and hadn't felt in years. Someone had stood between her and a room. No one had ever done that. She looked at Marcus and found her chest tight and her eyes hot, and she looked away before anyone could see. But Eleanor's voice was in her head. Good things come back, not always how you expect. And for the first time she let herself, just slightly, believe it. It didn't make her trust him. She'd been taught too well for that. But it cracked something open, and through the crack she could see for the first time the shape of a different kind of life. Bianca followed him to his office and slammed the door. "How dare you?" she said. "In front of everyone. Do you have any idea what that does to me? People have thought of me as your future wife for 15 years. People," Marcus said, not looking up from his desk, "have thought a lot of things. I never said any of them. You never unsaid them." And there was the one true thing Bianca had, the accusation that landed, and Marcus felt it land. Because it was true. He had let the assumption stand for years, because it was convenient, because it kept other women at bay, because it had cost him nothing to let the world believe a thing he had no intention of making real. He had used Bianca's hope as a wall, the same way he used his money as a wall, and he had never once thought about what it was doing to the person on the other side of it. "You're right," he said, and it stopped her cold. "I let it stand because it was easy. That was a cruelty, and I'm sorry for it." He looked at her then, and his voice was not unkind, which somehow made it worse. "But hear me clearly, because I should have said it a decade ago. There was never anything between us, Bianca. There is never going to be. I never asked you to build your life around me, and I should have stopped you, and I didn't, and that's on me. But it ends today. Stop waiting for a thing that was never real." Bianca stood very still. 15 years. She had given 15 years to a foundation that had never been poured, and he was telling her, kindly, that the house she'd built her whole self inside had always been air. Something behind her eyes broke and reassembled into something harder. "You'll regret her," she said quietly, and walked out. The thing about a person with nothing left to protect is that they become capable of anything. Bianca had just been told plainly that the future she'd banked her life on did not exist. She did not weep. She did not beg. She went home and she sat in the dark, and she made a decision that a kinder 15 years might never have led her to. If she could not have the life, she would make sure the girl who'd cost it her could not have it either. She had one piece of access left. As a senior manager, she had a code to the family's private collection, the vault at the mansion where the heirloom pieces lived, the ones too valuable and too storied to sit in a store. Late one evening, when the house was quiet and Nias had gone up, and Marcus was still downtown, Bianca let herself in through a side entrance she'd used 100 times across 15 years of belonging. And she went down to the vault, and she took one thing, a diamond necklace, a real one, museum grade, worth more than most people's homes. She slid it into her bag. And then she walked, calm and unhurried, up to the guest wing, to the room where Nia Coleman slept, and she tucked it deep in the bottom of a drawer, under the few thin clothes the girl owned, where it would look exactly like what it would be made to look like. She let herself out the way she'd come. No one saw her. She had, after all, belonged in that house for 15 years. The morning it surfaced, Nia was getting ready for work when the guest wing doors opened without a knock and the room filled with people. 2 house guards, the head of security, and behind them Bianca, and behind Bianca, a woman Nia had never met but knew at once, by the way the staff arranged themselves around her. Tall, silver-haired, draped in the quiet armor of serious money, a face like a closed door. Marcus's mother, Vivian Hampton, home at last and not happy. Nia Coleman, the head of security, wouldn't meet her eyes. "We need you to come with us, and we need to search this room." Why? Nia's heart was already going. Search it for what? Bianca stepped forward, and her eyes were bright with what looked, to anyone who didn't know better, like tears. "I didn't want to believe it," she said to the room, to the cameras of everyone's attention. "When the necklace went missing from the vault, I told myself, surely not. Surely she wouldn't. But they have to look. We have to be sure." Her voice trembled beautifully. "I so wanted to be wrong about you." They opened the drawers. It took the guard about 40 seconds. He lifted the necklace out from under Nia's thin folded clothes and held it up, and it threw hard light around the room. and the silence that followed had a texture Nia could feel on her skin. "There," Vivian said. Her voice was cold and final, the voice of a woman who had walked in already certain. "A thief. I knew it. I knew the moment I heard about her." She looked at Nia with flat contempt. They always have a story, these girls, the kindness, the humility. And then the jewelry walks out the door. Nia could not breathe. She looked at the necklace, at the faces, at Bianca's lovely false grief, and the whole machine of it closed around her. And she understood with a sick lurch exactly how this looked, and exactly how impossible it would be to talk her way out of it. "I didn't," she wanted to say. "I would never." But she had stood on a marble floor once and learned what her own defense was worth in a room that had already decided. "Enough." Eleanor's voice cut across all of it. The old woman had come to the doorway, small and straight, and the room shifted toward her on instinct. "Nia did not take that necklace," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm and absolute. "I know this girl. I have watched her refuse a Carter and tear up her own pride rather than take what was earned. She did not steal from us. We are missing something here, and it is not a necklace." For one flickering instant, Bianca's lovely composure cracked, a flash of pure animal panic, there and gone. Then she pressed a hand to her mouth and produced a small, perfect sob. "Mama Elena, I know you love her. But the evidence is right there. We can't let our hearts." Evidence. Eleanor looked at the necklace, then at Bianca, then at the drawer, with an expression that suggested she was doing arithmetic and arriving at a number she did not like. "Evidence can be carried into a room as easily as out of one. We will look into this properly." But she was outvoted by the weight in the air, by Vivian's certainty, by the guards, by the necklace's terrible glitter, by the simple fact that a roomful of rich people, looking at a poor girl with a diamond in her drawer, will believe their own eyes over an old woman's faith every time. And Nia, standing in the center of it, made her choice. The same choice. She would not beg. She would not perform her innocence for people who'd already cast her. She gathered her few thin things into her bag with steady hands, and she looked once, only once, at the door, where she could hear Marcus's footsteps coming fast down the hall, and she did not wait to see his face. She walked out past all of them with her chin level and her back straight, and she did not say one word in her own defense, because words had never once saved her, and she would not waste her last dignity spending them now. Marcus reached the hall as she reached the stairs. He started toward her, but Eleanor caught his arm and held it and said low, "Let her go for now. You can't fix this by chasing her down the drive. You fix it by being right and proving it. Go be right." And Marcus, every muscle in him, straining to follow, stood still and let the woman he was beginning to understand he loved walk out of his house under a cloud, because his grandmother was telling him the only way to truly clear her was to do it with proof and not with passion. It was the hardest thing he'd done in years. He let her go, and then he went to find the footage. Nia sat in her small apartment, hers for a few more days until the rent she couldn't pay came due, and stared at the wall and felt, for the first time in a long time, truly defeated. Not poor. She'd always been poor. Falsely branded a thief, cast out of the one place that had briefly started to feel like it might hold her. She'd let herself believe, just a little, in good things come back, and here was the world correcting her. The knock came that evening. She opened the door, expecting bad news in some new shape, and found Vivian Hampton standing in her doorway, perfectly dressed, faintly appalled by the smallness of the room. "Mrs. Hampton, may I come in?" It wasn't a question. Vivian stepped past her, taking in the cramped space with a flick of her eyes, and then turned, and from her bag produced a checkbook and a gold pen, and clicked the pen and wrote, standing up, using the wall as a desk. She tore the check out and held it. "I came to make you an offer," she said. $5 million. You leave my son alone. Leave the city if you have any sense, and you never contact him again. It's yours, tonight. No one need ever know about the unpleasantness with the necklace. I'll see the whole matter dropped." She extended it the way you'd extend a treat to a difficult animal. "Take it. Be sensible. Girls like you don't get offered this twice. Nia looked at the check. $5 million. A number so large it stopped meaning anything. A number that would erase the rent and the fear and the whole grinding arithmetic of her life forever. That would buy a kind of safety she had never once in 26 years been able to imagine. She thought about it. She would not pretend later, even to herself, that she didn't think about it. She was not a saint. The project file in her head said, "This solves everything," and for one long second, she let it sit there, real and enormous. And then she picked up the check, and she looked Vivian Hampton in the eye, and she tore it in half. "I love your son," she said quietly, and was a little surprised to hear herself say it out loud, and more surprised to find it true. "I didn't plan to. It's deeply inconvenient. But I'm not going to take money to disappear, because I'm not the thing you've decided I am, and the day I let you pay me to act like I am is the day you'd be right." She held out the two halves of the check. "I'm not a gold digger, Mrs. Hampton. I'm just a person you've never bothered to look at. Take your check." For a long moment, Vivian Hampton did not move. She had run this test before. Nia could see it, the practiced ease of it, the certainty. She had offered checks to other women across the years, and watched every one of them fold the paper into their bag with a grateful little smile, confirming everything she believed about the kind of girl who got close to her son. It had never, not once failed, it had just failed. Something shifted in the older woman's face, not warmth, not yet, but the cold click of a recalibration, a person being forced to revise a belief they'd held a long time. "Well," Vivian said at last very quietly. She took the torn halves. "You're not what I expected." "No," Nia said, exhausted past politeness. "People rarely are. That's sort of the whole problem, isn't it?" Vivian looked at her a moment longer. Then she turned and let herself out, and Nia sank down onto the floor with her back against the door. And finally let herself cry. For the job, for the house, for the man, for the brief, warm, impossible glimpse of belonging that had been snatched back. She did not know that across the city, Marcus Hampton had not slept, and was 3 hours into proving her innocent. Because that was what he'd done with the days the world thought he'd spent doing nothing. He hadn't chased her down the drive. He'd done the harder, slower, surer thing. He pulled every frame of footage from the night the necklace vanished. He interviewed the guards, the night staff, the woman who cleaned the guest wing. And on the vault camera, the one Bianca had forgotten existed because 15 years of belonging had made her careless, he found it. All of it. Time-stamped, lit, unmistakable. He brought them all together in the great front room of the mansion. His mother, his grandmother, the senior staff, and Bianca, who arrived in an elegant gown and sat sipping tea like a woman who had already won. Because in her mind she had. "Marcus," she smiled at him as he came in. "I'm so sorry about all this. I know it must be hard, finding out what she really—" "Be quiet, Bianca." He said it without heat, which was worse than heat, and crossed to the wall and picked up a remote. The screen lit, and there she was. Bianca Vaughan in the time-stamped dark, letting herself into the vault. Bianca lifting the necklace from its case. Bianca walking, calm and unhurried, up the stairs toward the guest wing with the bag in her hand. The footage was silent and clear and went on just long enough. The room made a sound, a collective intake of breath. Vivian's hand had risen to her mouth. Eleanor was shaking her head slowly, with the particular sorrow of someone who had suspected and hated to be right. Bianca had gone the color of the marble. That's fake," she said, standing, the teacup rattling into its saucer. "That's not. Marcus, you can't possibly." "It's the vault camera," Marcus said. "You forgot it was there. You used to be allowed everywhere in this house, so you stopped seeing the cameras. That's what belonging does." He set the remote down. "You stole from my family and you planted it on an innocent woman to destroy her, because I told you the truth about us and you couldn't bear it." And here the story might, in another telling, have given Bianca a sobbing collapse, a begging on the knees, a tidy villain's punishment. It didn't go that way. Bianca Vaughan stood in the middle of the room. She had spent 15 years trying to make her own. exposed in front of every person whose opinion she'd built her life on. And she did not weep, and she did not beg. She went very still and very cold, and when she spoke, her voice shook with something that was almost dignity. I gave 15 years to this family, she said. 15 years of being told I was your future. Nobody asked me if I wanted it. They just handed it to me and let me believe it, all of you, for years. T and then he. Her chin jerked at Marcus, decided one afternoon it was never real, like flicking off a light. So don't stand there. Don't any of you stand there and act shocked. You built the woman who did this. I just stopped pretending to be the other one. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession even, so much as an accusation that happened to be true at the same time as her crime was true. And the terrible thing, the thing that hung in the room after, was that no one could entirely deny it. She had done a monstrous thing. And she had also been quietly, casually wronged for 15 years by a family that found her convenient. Both were real. The room held both. You're finished here, Marcus said quietly. You'll resign from the company tonight. You'll return what you took. You'll never set foot in this house again. I'm not going to drag you out, and I'm not going to put you in a cell to make a scene of it. That would be for me, not for justice. You're just done. You'll walk out, and the door will close, and your name will stop opening anything in this city. That's all. That's enough. It was, in the end, the heaviest possible punishment for a woman like Bianca Vaughn. Not handcuffs, not tears, just the quiet closing of every door she'd spent her life trying to stand inside. She picked up her bag with shaking hands, and she walked out alone into a future where the one thing she'd built was gone, and nothing had come to replace it. She did not look back. There was nothing behind her to look at. When the door had closed, the room was quiet a long time. I misjudged her, Vivian said finally. She was not a woman who said such things easily. The words came out stiff, like furniture being moved. The Coleman girl. I offered her money to leave you. 5 million. A pause. She tore it up. Told me she wasn't the thing I'd decided she was. Another pause longer. She was right, I had decided. Before I ever looked at her, Vivian's jaw worked. I'd like to speak with her. To make it right if she'll let me. Though I don't suppose she owes me the chance. Eleanor looked at her daughter-in-law, and something old and tired and almost tender passed between the two women. No, Eleanor agreed. She doesn't owe you anything. That's rather the point of her. She rose slow and straight. Go gently. She's been handled roughly enough by this family to last a lifetime. If you go to her like you're conferring a favor, she'll show you the door, and she'll be right too. Marcus was already reaching for his coat. Nia almost didn't open the door. She'd had enough of this family's knocks. But the voice on the other side, when it came, was not the one she expected, and not the one she dreaded. It was Marcus, and it was not the CEO's voice or the magazine voice. It was just his, Nia, it's me. I have proof. It was Bianca. All of it, the necklace, all of it, it's on camera, it's over, your name is clear. A pause on the other side of the cheap door. But I'm not here about that. I could have sent Desmond about that. I'm here because I let you walk out of my house under a lie, and I'll regret that for a long time. And I needed to say it to your face. Will you open the door? She opened the door. He looked terrible in the way that very put-together men look terrible. Like a building with one wall gone. He didn't reach for her. He'd learned somewhere in the last weeks not to reach for her with things. I'm sorry, he said. I should have stopped them in that room. I let my grandmother talk me into being strategic when I should have just stood between you and all of it. The way he stopped. The way you did for my grandmother on a marble floor without thinking about strategy at all. You were better at this than I was. You just did the right thing, I calculated. Nia leaned against the doorframe. She was so tired. You cleared my name, she said. I'm grateful, I am. But I need you to understand something, Marcus, before this goes anywhere, if it goes anywhere. Her voice was quiet and steady. I have spent my whole life being a problem other people solve. Daphne solved me by firing me. Bianca solved me by framing me. Your mother solved me with a check. And the first day I met you, You tried to solve me with a car. She watched that land. I don't want to be solved. I've been alone a long time and it nearly broke me, but at least when I was alone, I was mine. If I let you in, I need to still be mine. I won't be a thing that got fixed and rewarded and tied into a happy ending. I'm a person. I'd rather be a poor person who's nobody's project than a rich man's miracle. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, like a man absorbing the single most important note he'd ever been given. I hear you, he said. I've spent my whole life unable to tell whether anyone wanted me or the things I could hand them. So I hand people things. It's a reflex, it's a wall. He almost smiled. You're the first person who ever made the wall feel stupid. You wouldn't take anything. There was nothing for me to hide behind. I just had to stand there, as myself, and hope that was enough. He looked at her. I don't want to solve you, Nia. I want to be a person who's around while you solve your own things. That's all, slowly, on your terms, no cars. She looked at him a long time. No cars, she agreed finally. The smallest possible smile. We can start with no cars and see how it goes. It wasn't a kiss in the rain. It wasn't a proposal at a fountain. It was two careful people standing in a doorway, in a poor part of the city agreeing, tentatively to try. And that was more than either of them had ever managed before, and they both knew it. The reckoning at the store came later, and quietly, the way Marcus did things now. He walked into the Hampton & Co. flagship on an ordinary afternoon, and the floor went rigid, because the man whose name was 3 feet tall over the door had never once set foot in it before. Daphne came forward fast, smoothing her dress, her smile already on. Mr. Hampton, what an honor, sir. We had no idea you were. You had a customer in here a few weeks ago, Marcus said. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. An older woman, poorly dressed. You told her there was a library down the block where she could sit. You had your staff laugh at her. And you fired an associate, Nia Coleman, for kneeling down and giving that woman her own bus money. Daphne's smile was dying by inches. Sir, that woman was disruptive. That woman, Marcus said, is my grandmother. She built this company. Her name is the one over your head. He let the floor absorb it, the small sounds of horror, Renee's hand flying to her mouth, Patrice going grey. She built it from a counter exactly like the one you're standing at. She goes out into the world in old clothes sometimes to find out who people really are when they think no one's watching. And she found out who you are. The silence on the floor was total. You're not fired because you embarrassed me, Marcus went on evenly. You're fired because of who you are when you think the person in front of you can't do anything to you. That's the only test that's ever mattered, and you failed it the second you decided a tired old woman in cheap shoes was beneath your courtesy. That's it. That's the whole reason. He nodded to the security at the door. Clear out your locker. The same goes for anyone on this floor who was laughing. He turned to go, then paused. Nia Coleman built more goodwill in this store in 14 months than the rest of you have in your careers. She'll be opening a foundation soon, for people exactly like the ones you sneer at. If any of you ever want to understand what you got wrong, that's where to look. Good afternoon. And he walked out and left the floor in ruins behind him, and didn't gloat, because gloating was just another kind of wall, and he was learning to live without them. Daphne Hill stood in the wreckage of the life she'd clawed so hard to build, in the cold white room she'd remade herself to belong in, and understood, far too late, that the thing she'd been so terrified of, being sent back down, being revealed as someone who didn't belong, had finally happened, and that she had done it to herself, with her own mouth, over a paper cup of water she could have simply let a kind girl bring. They did not get married in a cathedral with a tiara in the end. That had been someone else's story. Nia kept her own apartment for a long time, even after it stopped being about the rent. Kept it the way you keep a door you can walk out of, because a person who's been owned learns to value an exit more than a palace. She and Marcus took it slowly, the way she'd said, a year of dinners that were just dinners, of her telling him no and him learning to hear it, of two-walled people taking the walls down one careful brick at a time. Vivian came to her eventually, not with a check but with an apology that cost her something real to make. And Nia, who knew exactly what it cost a proud person to say a true thing, let her in, slowly on her own terms, the only way Nia let anyone in. And the foundation became real. The Kind Heart, Nia called it, a little embarrassed by the name and keeping it anyway. And it did the unglamorous work of finding jobs and second chances for people the city had written off. The ones in shiny elbowed blazers, the ones told there was a library down the block. Marcus funded it and stayed out of it, which was, Nia told him, the single most romantic thing he'd ever done. When they did finally marry, years on, it was small, and the only heirloom involved was a thing. Eleanor pressed into Nia's hand the morning of. Not a sapphire brooch, not a $30 million necklace, just an old paper cup, gone soft and yellow with age, kept all this time in a drawer in the great house. You don't remember this, the old woman said. But I do. It's the cup you brought me the water in. The day they all laughed. Her eyes were wet and bright. I kept it. 60 years I've been rich, child, and I have a vault full of things worth more than some countries, and the most valuable thing I own is a paper cup a broke girl filled with tap water for an old woman she thought was nobody. She closed Nia's fingers around it, the way Nia had once closed hers around a few crumpled bills. There. Now it's yours. Put it somewhere you'll see it, not to remember me, to remember her, the girl who knelt down. Don't ever lose her. She's the whole fortune. The rest is just stuff. Nia took the cup. It sits now on a windowsill in a house that is comfortable but not grand, between a coffee mug and a small green plant, where the morning light finds it. It is worth nothing. A child who lives in the house asks about it sometimes, why they keep the ratty old cup, and gets only that it was a gift, and that it's the most important thing in the room, which makes no sense to a child, so the child forgets to keep asking. The cup stays. The light moves across it every morning, the way light does, and the woman who once knelt on a marble floor sees it on her way to the work of her life, and does not need to be told what it means, because she was there, and she remembers what it cost and what it was worth, which were never the same number and never will be.